Good morning, Your Worship. If it pleases you, my name is Josiah Lee, and I am here on behalf of my client, Mr. John Smith, the accused. The accused, Mr. John Smith, has been charged with causing serious injury recklessly and reckless assault under Section 17 of the Crimes Act 1958. Under this statutory provision, any person who recklessly causes serious injury is guilty of an indictable offence with a maximum penalty of 15 years imprisonment under a Level 4 offence, as per the Sentencing Act 1991, Section 109, as you have before you. Due to the nature of the offence, the Magistrates' Court involvement in the matter is strictly committal, and should John Smith be committed to trial, it will take place in the County Court. It is my belief that Mr. John Smith has enough precedent to be granted bail on the following basis. Firstly, Mr. John Smith's application for bail should be accepted on the basis of precedent. In reference to the Ryan Wells case, where a man was granted bail despite having far more horrendous charges and evidence laid against him, it seems fair that Mr. Smith, whose offence is nowhere near as egregious, should be granted bail as well. It is in this circumstance that Mr. Ryan Wells also demonstrated an extreme lack of remorse for the act that he committed, whereas Mr. John Smith has not been given the appropriate amount of time necessary to show his remorse through community service or through a mitigated sentence. Secondly, under Section 4E of the Bail Act 1977, it can be reasonably assumed that Mr. John Smith can be categorised under all four requirements of the section. There is no indication he would pose further risk to the community due to the one-off nature of the incident. There is no indication he would re-offend due to his non-criminal history, would not interfere with witnesses or obstruct justice, and finally would not fail to surrender himself into custody, as he did not resist arrest the first time either. Furthermore, no precedent exists for Mr. John Smith to be presumed inherently hostile, and thus granting bail seems not just reasonable but mandatory in this circumstance. Thirdly, John Smith's prior childhood connection with the president of a childhood gang, plus his lack of contact with his parents, are not relevant to the case at hand and shouldn't be considered legitimate character evidence. The connection with the crime gang has nothing to do with the case and is unrelated, and the connection in his childhood precipitates his adulthood, and there is no evidence to suggest that this connection is still relevant or prevalent today. Also, his lack of contact with his parents is a purely domestic matter, and something which has nothing to do with the case at hand and is protected under John Smith's right to privacy. And furthermore, I believe that Your Worship should ignore this under that basis of a liberal democratic society. The police prosecution has brought up the point of him being a security officer, and that under that basis he should be knowledgeable in the fact that assault is even less justifiable knowing this. However, I would argue that in this circumstance, the fact that he has no prior criminal convictions, and thus there is no evidence to suggest that this is anything more than an out-of-character moment, would, I would say, justify Your Worship deciding that Mr. John Smith is worthy of bail simply based on this precedent. Furthermore, I do not believe that Mr. John Smith should be rejected bail on any basis, considering that the evidence before you seems enough to warrant bail being granted in any circumstance. Thank you, Your Worship.